Hey everybody, welcome to Professional Picks' Week 2 Survivor Picks. Hopefully everyone survived Week 1, avoided some of the big upsets like the Seahawks hosting the Rams in Week 1. Let's take a look at what games we have in Week 2, what we're thinking are the best picks, some of the best strategy picks, and some of the teams that we think we should avoid. Let's take a look. And as always, please like the video if you're enjoying this and using this content. Comment your picks and what you're thinking. If you have any questions or in a predicament, I'm always happy to help and weigh in with my opinion. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you can watch these videos week in and week out and our other NFL content as well. So here it is. These are the 8 teams we're looking at for potential survivor picks in week 2. You see there are some teams at the top here that are favored by a touchdown and more. But after that, the pickings get a little slimmer here. You don't have that many teams that are favored by more than 3.5, 4 points this week. So it might be a time to pick more of the favorites, but we'll get into that later. Just a quick look at the field here with some teams that are favored by 3 points on the road, which, as we know, the home team gets 3 additional points. So these guys would be, -6 on a neutral turf, but something certainly to consider and certainly to avoid when your teams are getting only a 60% chance to win. Of course, something that we always want to take into account is to at least look at the schedule for the next few weeks ahead for each team that we're considering. This is a really important strategy to do if you're looking to play a little bit more strategic in your survivor picks, not necessarily taking the team that's favored by the most points to set yourself up to win your leagues come week 10, 11, 12 when you're searching for good teams to pick. For instance, right now the Bills look like one of the best picks right now in week 2, but come week 8 you might be wanting to have them in your back pocket, so you might not want to take the Bills this week if you're thinking ahead to later weeks. So something to always keep in mind when making your decision. The first game that I want to talk about this week are the Chargers playing the Titans. It is a game that I think you should proceed with caution on. Reason being is that, one, the Chargers are on the road in this game, always a little bit more nerve-wracking than if you get the home team. As we mentioned earlier, that adds about 3 points to your favorability in each game. And as you know, if you watch this, I'm a big fan of the Titans playing pretty close football as they did with the Saints this prior week. They're certainly, the Titans, not a very sound football team, especially offensively. So you saw Ryan Tannehill throwing a trio of picks in their game against the Saints. That being said, this is a Titans team that is known to, without warning, turn it on and compete in games that maybe they shouldn't. The Chargers coming off a loss as well on the road. It may be a good pick given how great their offense looked and how terrible the Titans offense looked. But again, the Titans are a team that always scared me with good coaching, good running back play with Derrick Henry, and solid defensive play as well. Titans are a team that always seems to stick around in games maybe they shouldn't. So this is a game I think you should certainly reconsider picking this week if you are. Another game to potentially proceed with caution on is this Saints-Panthers game. This one is even scarier than the Chargers game. Despite these two teams, Saints and Chargers, having the exact same win probability, this one is much more terrifying for me because the Saints are on the road playing a divisional opponent. That's always cause for concern. Sometimes it works out like you saw the Rams did it in week 1, the Cowboys did too, but more likely than not, when you're going to get an upset, it's going to be because a team is playing on the road or a team is playing the divisional opponent. In this situation, both are happening. So that's something always, even without throw out the record books, just the fact that you're an away team playing a divisional opponent, that should always make you stop and think twice about it. But the Saints didn't really look all that great to me despite getting the win against the Titans in week 1 in the 16-15 snoozer of a game. They weren't able to really convert all these turnovers that they forced into points. Their offense seemed a little sluggish, and I really didn't think they had a terrific run game there, despite the Titans having a decent defense. So that always concerns me. The Panthers play a great style of football for this NFC South division where they're a very stout run defense, good in the back half in the secondary, and aren't going to ask their offense isn't going to do that much, but their defense usually keeps them within the games. Bryce Young in week 1 showed what happens to rookie quarterbacks in the NFL, made a few mistakes by leaving the ball up the middle, letting the safeties pick it off. If he plays a better game and reduces those turnovers, then this is going to be a close game in my mind, just by the way the Panthers play football. So certainly a game that you should also reconsider picking. Now for the best pick in this week, we already talked about how maybe we shouldn't be picking the Chargers, maybe we shouldn't be picking the Saints, especially given their low probability to win. The team that I think would likely be the best pick this week are the Buffalo Bills, playing their home opener this year against the Raiders. While the Raiders did have an impressive win, I think, against the Broncos and played pretty well, I think they are no match for the Buffalo Bills that are one of the top tier in terms of team talent all around in football this year. I'm recording this video before the Monday Night Football game against the Jets. And honestly, I don't think the outcome of that game really matters in terms of this decision, as long as the Bills compete and look like the Bills that they think they are. I think you would like to see a bigger part of the run game, a bigger piece of the run game go to James Cook, the second-year player out of Georgia, brother of Dalvin Cook, who's now in the Jets. You're going to see a healthy load of Stephon Diggs, a wide receiver, and Josh Allen picking up his fair share in the run game, as well as a really good defense all around for the Bills. What I am most interested to see with the Bills on Monday Night Football is how that pass rush is going to put pressure on the quarterback and really disrupt timing. If they can get that going, then this is a very, very dangerous team. Even if they don't, this team is still all around better than the Raiders. The Raiders only put up about 17 points in week 1 on Sunday. I suspect the Bills will be able to put up much more than that against the Jets, who have a much better defense than the Raiders. Certainly, when the Bills do host the Raiders, they'll be putting up more than that as well. I got a hard time seeing the Bills lose to these guys. I think it's a pretty safe pick going into week 2. Now, the Bills aren't the only only really good pick I think there is this week. The other one that I strongly would consider would be the Eagles hosting the Vikings in Philadelphia in week 2. If you remember last year, the Eagles played the Vikings. I think it was Monday Night Football last year, and Philadelphia absolutely dismantled the Vikings. One of the few losses the Vikings had last year, but it was a beatdown. And the reason was not because the Vikings offense wasn't potent enough, it didn't have enough weapons. It was because the Vikings defense was so lackluster. And going over year, the Vikings didn't do a ton to address their defensive woes. And you see that in week 1, letting the likes of Baker Mayfield and that Buccaneers offense put up enough points to beat them. And in week 1, you saw the Vikings had a ton of turnover issues, something that the Eagles are known to force, with guys like James Bradbury and Darius Slay at cornerback, and a great interior defensive line as well that can get to the quarterback and cause QB pressures, hurries, and sacks. In addition, for this Eagles offense, you got A.J. Brown, who gets another year in this Eagles system to really get comfortable. Devonta Smith, another year under his belt to keep continuing to develop his career after being a Heisman winner at Alabama. And then Jalen Hurts, who continues to be a great leader for this offense and push this team forward and win tight games like they had last week in New England. I don't think this game is going to be any different or much different than it was last year. I think the Eagles absolutely blow out the Vikings again. I do think the Vikings are going to put up more points than they did against the Buccaneers. As you know, they got guys like Justin Jefferson, T.J. Hawkinson, K.J. Osborne on offense that can, really push that passing attack. But it's going to be no match for the Eagles going up against that Swiss cheese Vikings defense. And that's really the difference in this game. The Vikings defense is just simply not good enough to hold on against the Eagles. And so if you're not going to take the Bills this week, I think the other really, really good pick are the Eagles. Now that we talked about our 2 really good picks for the week, being the Bills and the Eagles, it's time to talk about our best value pick. In week 1, the best value pick were the Commanders, who, by the skin of their teeth, beat the Cardinals at home. The reason the Commanders were a value pick is because that's not a really great football team like we're talking about with the Bills or the Eagles. We're talking about a team that's in a situational spot where it is an opportune time to take them in Survivor, and you're not going to get many opportunities again later in the season. And that's exactly the situation right now for the Giants that got smoked on Sunday Night Football against the Cowboys at home. I think a lot of people are going to be turned away and kind of have a sour taste in their mouth for this Giants team, but that's exactly why it's a good time to take them for the value pick. They're playing the Cardinals here, who didn't, I mean, they competed with the Commanders, but they didn't do all that well. The Cardinals had their fair share of turnovers, as well as forcing a few against the Commanders too, but they only put up 16 points. They barely threw the ball down the field, and Joshua Dobbs at quarterback just certainly isn't the solution. I think the Giants with Saquon Barkley alone will be enough to probably beat these guys. The reason this is truly a value pick is because if you look at this Giants schedule for the next few weeks out, there's not a ton of games you're picking them at. You might be picking them at home in Week 7 against the Commanders, and that's depending on how Sam Howell develops as quarterback, which is yet to be seen. But you take a look at the rest of their schedule, they're playing a lot of playoff teams, or they're on the road against solid teams as well, if not divisional opponents. So not many times you're taking the Giants for the rest of the season, at least in the first half plus. Really a general rule for these value plays for this season is if you're playing the Cardinals, it's probably a good value. Knowing that schedule, I think it's a really good time to pick the Giants here as 4-point favorites on the road against the Cardinals. Definitely a scary pick being on the road, but the Cardinals are a much different football team than the Cowboys. The Cowboys obviously just dismantled the Giants, and that was largely due to the fact that they could get pressure with their 4 guys, Micah Parsons included, almost immediately against this Giants offensive line. You're not going to see that same type of pressure put on by the Cardinals. Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, these are next level Pro Bowl defenders, and Micah Parsons, who I think is the best defensive player in the football and very likely the defensive player of the year. The Cardinals don't have those guys on that side of the football. The Cardinals additionally aren't going to be able to throw the ball that much as they didn't against the Commanders. They're likely going to keep committing turnovers as they did in Week 1. And as the Giants can just take care of the ball like they didn't in the monsoon that was happening in New York on Sunday night, I think they'll be fine this week. Another great value play, though, I think are the Broncos on the road against the Commanders. Certainly not as good of a value play as the Giants because the Commanders are a little bit better of a caliber team than the Cardinals, as we just saw on Sunday. And you can tell by the spread that they're a little bit less likely to win. But I do like the Broncos kind of for the same reason as the Giants. They're going to get a bounce back win, hopefully, this game as favorites, despite being on the road, which again is a little nerve-wracking. But you look at the schedule for the Broncos too, there's not a ton of times you're picking them in the first half of the season throughout week 11, 12. That being said, I think it's a fair time to look at them. But this week, I think there's so much good value with the Giants or great picks with the likes of the Eagles or Bills. It's pretty risky, extremely risky to be picking the Broncos here. And while it's good value, it's probably not something that I would do myself. And with that, that leaves us with 2 teams left that we have not mentioned. The 49ers on the road against the Rams and the Lions hosting the Seahawks in Detroit. Starting with the Niners, in almost every other circumstance this season, if there was a road team on playing a divisional opponent, I would advise against it immediately. But these are the San Francisco 49ers who looked absolutely incredible against the Pittsburgh Steelers on the road on Sunday. They got another road game here, but at least they'll be playing in West Coast time. Everything was clicking on all cylinders for the 49ers on Sunday, and I think you're going to see a lot of that throughout the rest of the season. The run game was superb. The passing game with Brock Purdy looked great. The defense was flying all over the football field, producing turnovers and sacks and everything in between. They looked like the best team in football. And while the Rams got a nice win on the road against the Seahawks, they're simply not in the same league as the 49ers. If Cooper's out, Cooper Kupp being out again in week 2 certainly doesn't help them, despite some other receivers really stepping up for the Rams. Again, I'm not picking this in the best or good picks for the fact that it is a divisional game on the road, but that's a really good spot for the Niners to get a win. I think there are much better times the rest of the season that you could pick the Niners as 7-point favorites and be much safer, especially with the strength of the Eagles and the Bills. I think it's best to probably stay away from the Niners this week. Looking at the Lions, hosting the Seahawks, coming off a tough loss against the Rams that we just mentioned. Lions coming off a huge win on the road in Kansas City on Thursday night. I think you need to discount that win a little bit against the Chiefs because the fact that Travis Kelce was out, because the fact that these Chiefs wide receivers dropped every single ball thrown to them. A win is a win in the NFL, and there's no doubt about that. But don't have it in your mind that the Lions just beat the defending Super Bowl champions, because they did, but they didn't, because they played a much different team than what won the Super Bowl, and they played a much different team than the Chiefs are capable of being. Come week 17, 18, even without Travis Kelce, the Chiefs would play a much better game than they did against the Lions. And with Travis Kelce, it's obviously a much different story. So while the Lions did get a win, it is not as impressive to me as it may seem on paper. So I think they're fine enough to beat the Seahawks, but I don't think the talent margin is that wide enough for me to really like picking the Lions this week against the Seahawks. They're going to still do their thing and light up the scoreboard, pass the ball a lot. These medium to short routes that Jared Goff likes to throw in these timing routes. They got a nice rookie tight end, Sam Laporta, out of Iowa. Jahmyr Gibbs looks really great out of the backfield in some explosive plays. And David Montgomery running the ball up the middle looks pretty solid too. But what does make me a little bit nervous of all the weapons that the Seahawks have at wide receiver, with Jackson Smith and Jigba as a rookie out of Ohio State, Tyler Lockett out of the slot, and then DK Metcalf as that deep threat wide up. So still probably a good pick for the Lions, but something that I'm just staying away from this week, just because of the fact that I think there's good value below and great picks above them. So knowing that, use your best decision along with the advice that I gave to take your pick in week 2. As always, consult with the schedule. Take a look for yourself of when you think you would see yourself taking these teams later in Survivor. Like I mentioned for the Broncos and Giants, I think there's great value there because you're really not going to be picking them many times for the rest of the season. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily a good pick, because if they lose this week and you're out, then strategy for the rest of the season no longer matters. But it is certainly something to keep in mind, especially if you're in very competitive leagues with lots of people. That's how you win, by playing the strategy game. And to recap, I think the Bills are likely the best pick this week, despite anything astronomical happening on Monday Night Football in terms of injuries. Again, the Eagles also a really good pick this week hosting the Vikings. I think they just own the matchup of their offense playing that really abysmal Vikings defense. You got some great value with the Giants and good value with the Broncos, although be careful with those teams as they are on the road, and then be especially careful with the Chargers and the Saints, as those are low spread games with road teams. And as always, best of luck in week 2 in your Survivor picks. May everyone win this week. Come back in week 3 and see our recommendations then. Best of luck, and we've got this.